What is the most popular anime of the current season? That is the question I want to answer today, or at least that I want to discuss and examine. Not what is the best anime of the season, because that is subjective, and also everyone will be different. Except when you say Frieren, because that is objectively the correct answer. And it's still airing right now, so yes, best anime, but that's not what I wanted to look at right now. I wanted to look at what is the most popular. Now, how do you figure out popularity? Well, we live in the age of the internet, and all we need to do is go out into the internet and find the information that we are looking for. But actually finding said information, well, that's the hard part. That is the battle that we must face, getting in that data. Because if you're trying to figure out like the popularity of any particular show, it's like, well, where do you go for that? Even if you have a website that's just like, here is like all the greatest anime, and there are several websites out there that list and rank anime in any particular season, especially the airing season, but you compare them and then you're like, they're not always the same, because it all depends on the user bases of those websites. So what do you do to try and find something and make it as least bias as possible? Well, you either aggregate all of it if you can, or you try and limit where you're getting your data from to specific places. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, I want to preface the information section of this video by stating that I am not the one that accumulated all of this knowledge. We're going to give a massive shout out to Miles Atherton. He has an article about all of this stuff that he has done coming out soon, question mark, maybe, but he has given me permission to actually look at some of the data that he has grabbed. Not specific data, so there are certain things that I've been asked not to show, but the results of that data is what we're going to be looking at, and then we can try and figure out certain things about what he did, where he got information from, and what that means going forward, what that means for the season especially. So in order to figure out the popularity of any show, we need to pull from various sources. So looking at the data that we have, where are those sources? Where is all of the data we're looking at today coming from? Let's drag some of the more popular websites into the mix. How popular is the series on My Anime List? Now, for a lot of reasons, My Anime List isn't the best place to look at on its own. Trying to figure out like biased user bases, I mean, there is a type of person that uses My Anime List, and also not everybody that watches anime uses My Anime List. I don't use My Anime List. I don't use it for its listing purposes. I use it more as a database or a resource. There are limitations to that, but also if you had a show that is being watched by a very large portion of that website's user base, might be worth looking into. So that is in the data set. Wikipedia. Now this one is great because there are so many things that would help us in trying to determine the popularity of the show that we just don't have. Right? If a show was on Crunchyroll, Crunchyroll is not going to tell us how often a show is viewed. They're not going to give us view counts. They're not going to give us any of the information that would actually be useful for anything like that. Same with any streaming site. Netflix is not going to tell us how well watched a particular show is. Amazon's not going to tell us how particular watched a show is. Disney is not going to tell us how well a particular show did from like pure view counts. But Wikipedia, that's the thing. A lot of people use Wikipedia to look up information about shows, but the page views on any individual subject of Wikipedia is publicly available. So let's drag the page view count of all of the currently airing shows and add that to the data set. That could be something to pay attention to. Social media, that's something else that we want to add in, but we have to figure out a good way of doing that. How do you tell whether or not something's popular on social media? Well, you just use keywords. You can go into Facebook and you can go into Twitter and you can go into a lot of social media things actually and search how popular particular keywords are. So in the case that we're doing today, we're largely looking at show titles, maybe specific character names or things, keywords about shows that would regularly be searched, and how often all of that happens. Take that, throw it in the data set. Now, I did say a second ago that Crunchyroll does not post views. They just don't. However, what they do have is if you go to any individual show page on Crunchyroll, there is a voting system where people can rank essentially, like with 5 stars, what they thought of a particular show. We don't care today what was ranked. We don't care how many people gave a show 1 star. That's not important to us. We're not looking at that data. Also, because I would question the accuracy. But we can check in how often things were voted for. right? The total amounts of votes from the Crunchyroll user base. Because if a show is more popular, it'll have more people that actually vote on it. Now, not everybody that watches a show will vote. Again, there are limitations with every piece of data set, but that is why we are trying to gather so many things into one place to try and get as accurate as possible. Downside, of course, is that Crunchyroll section, unlike everything else, is basically only limited to shows on Crunchyroll. Now, a lot of the shows that are airing this season are on Crunchyroll, so that is helpful, but some of them are not. Some of them are instead available on other sites. But the problem is, if you're wanting to try and find something a little bit more uniform, you gotta go to places that have that information. So we sailed the high seas. I'm not going to point out exactly where the data came from, mostly because that is promoting websites that I don't like. But we can at least steal the publicly available data from them for our purposes today, because not everybody uses legal streaming services. This is a fact, plain and simple. We're not going to get into the arguments today of whether or not you should, whether you shouldn't. Different video, different time, not looking at that today. But what we can look at is the view counts on virtually every series on particular pirate websites. We can take that and we can add it. And I actually think we have found a particular use case to show an interesting bit of data when it comes to that, and we'll get to it. Lastly, for good measure, let's find some place that actually does anime rankings and toss that in there, with the knowledge, of course, that everything is biased. So I think for the data set today, we added in anime trending, and how particular shows rank on anime trending we've added to the data set. Which I find hilarious, because if you watched most of the news videos that we did here on the channel last year, we spent a decent amount of time on anime trending's charts specifically, and how they rank things over the courses of seasons, and how my personal opinions differed from that of the user base of anime trending. So it is a choice to have it in the data set, but it's here nonetheless. Now, unlike a lot of the things that I do here on the channel, normally, if you look at like any of the seasonal videos that I do and things like that, I cut out sequels. Because from what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to accomplish, having a sequel doesn't really add anything. Also because sequels are more popular than original shows as a baseline, because you already had a show that was popular, it got a following, it got popular enough to have a second season, so generally speaking, you're going to see a lot of sequels that have a higher popularity ranking than original shows. But for the purposes of the data set that we are looking at today, sequels are included. What is not included, however, probably because that would just make my life so much easier if it was, is shows that are continuing on from previous seasons. Those are not included today. So we're not looking at Frieren, we're not looking at Apothecary Diaries, we're not looking at things that were airing last season that are still currently airing now. We're only looking at what has started with this season. Now, I'm going to be blurring out the names of the list as I'm showing you the spreadsheet that we have here, mostly because that'll be an interesting surprise as we continue along. But if you look at the raw scores, there is a very big gap here between the number 1 and the number 2. How scores were done in this data set is a little bit interesting, but also kind of, I feel like leaning more towards the number 1 no matter what, especially in this particular seasonal case. The reason why you have the number 1 show with a raw score of 10 and the one in second place is the raw score of 3 is because everything is compared to the max possible score that we can give it. And when you're just looking at like page views and you're looking at impression numbers, the max in the case of what we're looking at is the highest number in any of those particular categories. The highest number that you can get in Wikipedia page views is the series that had the highest number of page views, because otherwise your max is infinite, and we're just not going to get to that today. So if you have a series, like we seem to, that had the highest of everything, the most amount of mal users, the highest page counts on Wikipedia, the most impressions in social media, and on and on and on and on and on, then yeah, you're going to get something that has an extremely high score, and then everything else is compared to that. So in this case, our number 1 show is an outlier, and that's fascinating, because that means that a show is running away with the popularity rankings. Try and guess what that is. I'm not necessarily happy about it, but I understand. From that point in going down, though, everything is just a slow slide all the way down until we get to about 25 or so. And that makes sense. So everything above the 25 line, you're in the positives, and everything below, nobody likes you. Okay, not that nobody likes you, but you're far less popular than anything else. So if we start at the bottom, we're going to be looking at these rankings. Try and figure out where everything is. What do you think is the least popular show? Out of the information that you have gleaned, where you think our information is coming from, what biases might exist within that data, did you think it was Cardfight Vanguard? Because you'd be right. And that's hilarious to me, because I just stated how sequels are usually more popular than anything else. This is not the first season of Cardfight Vanguard. Cardfight Vanguard's been around for a while, so the fact that this is the absolute least popular show by every metric that we're looking at today is hilarious to me. Now, before I looked at any of this data set, I tried to figure out what I thought was going to be the worst show, based on what I did during my seasonal rankings. And I thought that the worst show that I looked at for the seasonal rankings of this season was the show called Snack Bossue. And according to this data set, Snack Bossue is at 46. It beat out a couple of other shows, but it only just barely beat out Fire Hunter Season 2. Really? Now, we haven't talked about Fire Hunter since the first season came out, but Fire Hunter's an amazing series. Why is it this far down? Because nobody's watching it. It's a Season 2, but nobody is watching it. People are sleeping on it, and that sucks. Especially because it is below Delusional Monthly Magazine, which I also think is a really not great show from this season. It is better than Snack Bossue, but that's purely because it is a more traditional animated style compared to Snack Bossue's weird 3D look thingy that it's trying to do. It was bad. I'm not a fan of it. But then you had Meiji Gekken and Synduality Noir that showed up. Urusei Yatsua's second season. I mean, as much as historically that series is amazing and very well known, the modern audiences haven't been appreciating it as much as they probably should, and, you know, that's fair. That's fine. But Bang Bravern is sitting here. What is wrong with you people? Out of all the things that are down here, you put the series that is basically what if super robots but realistic, in the same way that freaking Madoka was just like, what if magical girls but realistic? You took that series that has been freaking amazing for what it is trying to do, right? And that is least popular. That is less popular. That is less looked at. That is potentially less viewed than the freaking Mahjong series that, honestly, it's only positive piece of entertainment media is for people that just want to see large-breasted women play Mahjong. And they don't even care about the Mahjong. What then saddens me even more about looking at this data is how the shows that I've actually been following have ranked, because they're not doing well. A very large chunk of the shows that I am actively keeping up with are below the median line, right? I'm keeping up with 'Tis Time for Torture. I'm keeping up with Villain's Day Off. I'm keeping up with Weakest Tamer and Sasaki and Peeps, because I'm enjoying all of those shows. I'd probably keep up with Metallic Rouge a bit more if, probably the series was done. I don't feel like that's a show that I can personally enjoy on a week-to-week basis. I need to do that all in one go. But I plan to come back to that. And 'Tis Time for Torture and Mr. Villain's Day Off are great for what they are, right? They are lighthearted popcorn series. They don't have high stakes. They don't have amazing Sakuga or anything else, but they're nice, calm, enjoyable shows. And those did worse than Dr. Elise, which is a boring series. Okay. That's too harsh. I'm being a bit too harsh towards Dr. Elise. It has a very great premise, right? It is a show that I thought I was going to like a lot, and then has just not gone anywhere, so I dropped it. Probably because shows like Seventh Time Loop are going up against it in this season, and that is just way better. Even thankfully by these metrics. But now if you get into the above the median line, based on this data set, well, what do we got? Well, you have some things that are just like, why is this here? And then you're like, oh, right, fan service. That's why Hokkaido Gals Are Super Adorable is coming in at number 15, because fan service. That's what the show is. That's all it is. Yeah, nice little romance between the main characters, but also fan service. Gushing over magical girls? Fine. Take the 10th spot. I don't care. That's great. Sign of Affection, 7th time loop. Okay, we're good. We're doing good then. Delicious in Dungeon is only at 7. And I think I know why. So again, I have been asked not to show the actual data behind the scenes of what is going on here in this data set. However, Delicious in Dungeon poses an interesting thing in that it is a Netflix series. And with that knowledge, I think we may be able to learn a particular thing. In that, looking at the data set for Delicious in Dungeon, where it excels, right, absolutely excels, is in things like Mal and, more specifically, Wikipedia. Looking purely at Wikipedia page views, Delicious in Dungeon is number 2. It is the second most popular show from this season that is being searched on Wikipedia, Delicious in Dungeon. But then why is it down as far as 7th? Again, this is because of the data set that we're using. And if you're looking at the data set that we're using, there is a big chunk of it that is all based on piracy. Here's a question. If you're a pirate, if you are streaming anime on pirate sites, do you also have a Netflix account? If the answer is yes, that explains a lot from what we're seeing from this data, because you're streaming Delicious in Dungeon, which is a Netflix show, on actual Netflix, and so the view count numbers on the pirate sites are way down by comparison. That's fascinating to me. Now, of course, we're making assumptions. We are determining things from the data that we have, and we might be missing something. But Delicious in Dungeon only being at 7th, despite it doing super well in other areas of the data sets that we're looking at, is fascinating to me. I love this part of data analysis. Of course, then you lead into the number 6 and the top 5. Most of the top 5, I don't have anything to talk about because all of it is sequels, with the exception of number 1. Dangerous in My Heart, Tsukimichi, Mashal, Classroom of the Elite 3. These are all sequels. It makes sense that they have very high popularity rankings because, as I mentioned before, they have fan bases that are already invested, that are already going to be watching it, that are already going to be talking about it. Makes sense that they're there. I will say, though, that the number 6 being The Wrong Way to Use Healing Magic does not make sense to me. In the overall rankings we have here, The Wrong Way to Use Healing Magic is more popular than Delicious in Dungeon. How? Obviously, the answer to that is that people are watching it. Whether it's just pirates really love that show, in combination with reasonably good showings in other places from Wikipedia to Mal to social media, that is a more popular series than I thought it would be. In my social circles, I will say I haven't seen the show talked about that much, but this is why I like looking at things like this, because I know that my little social bubble is just that. It is a bubble. I only see what is inside the bubble most times, and I need to venture out of the bubble in order to see other things. I did not realize that The Wrong Way to Use Healing Magic is that popular of a show, which depresses me, because if that is a series that a lot of people are actually keeping up with and I'm not, I feel bad, because I literally stopped watching it because I was just like, I need to cut things to save time in my week on a general basis. And the last time I watched a healing show, nobody gave a care, and I just watched it for the sake of, the main character is a healer, and I liked that. And I could have continued and watched this series for the exact same reason, but I chose not to, and of course, when I do that, that's when the show gets popular, of course. So I'm probably gonna go back to that. Of course, I've been beating around the bush, though, and the number 1 is Solo Leveling. You knew that. I knew that. I didn't even need to look at this data set to know that Solo Leveling was number 1. And it is the number 1 under every metric that we have here today. But did we learn anything? I actually think I learned quite a bit. There are certain things that I wasn't surprised with at all. Solo Leveling being the most popular show by the metrics that we've been looking at makes a lot of sense to me. I knew that going into this season. I saw how popular it was, and this kind of reinforces that. And beyond that, there were a whole bunch of sequels that take up the top 5. Totally makes sense to me. The more surprising thing, the thing that I did not expect to happen, was that a not insignificant amount of the shows that I actually chose to follow this season are below the median line. That sucks. Oh, but I just have a refined palate. I am more cultured than the masses. That is why I am watching these shows, and not as many people are, or so I will tell myself. But with any luck, Mr. Atherton should have, he said that he was going to be putting all of this data and his analysis of it into an article. Whether or not he gets around to actually doing that and publicly posting it, that's a different thing entirely. And if he does do that, I will post a link to it in the description, though I'm not sure that's going to be live by the time that this video goes up. Maybe it'll happen in the future. We'll have to see. But I mean, everything that we looked at today, this entire data set is based on information that is publicly available. So if you want to go and do some digging and figure out your own popularity lists, or figure out the data that was used here and come to your own conclusions, far be it from me to stop you. Go right on ahead. And of course, here at the end of the video, we want to give a big thank you to the patrons that make these videos possible, that make this channel possible as we continue on through the years and through the decades and through the many, many stuff that I am working on over time. And a big, large, ever so large, extremely huge thank you to certain patrons like Hector Montemayor, Sidi Yamako, Raifin Bonaparte, Sailor Arashi, Omar Showman, and Ross Emerson, because we cannot do this without your guys' support. And I thank you. So until next time, watch more anime. Maybe some of the more popular ones. And stay frosty.